It's about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hello, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? What we have on the menu today is to start up the Kill the Newsletter application. So we are going to look at how we start up the application and the different processes that make up the application. It will be a lot of fun. But before we get into that, I have news that I want to share with you all. Check this out. I know it's a small milestone, and it doesn't mean that I will be making a lot of money. I won't. But still, it is one milestone, and you all are part of this. So I want to say thank you. And the milestone is that I finally got all the prerequisites to be part of the YouTube Partnered Program. I know, it is ridiculous, right? Because it's such a small milestone. But it was the result of a lot of work over 2 years, 3 years, I don't even remember. And of course, this channel has been growing very slowly because I don't promote it a lot. I don't want it to grow very fast. And because it's very niche. We are talking about live coding almost on a daily basis, fairly long streams. It is not for everyone, so I wouldn't expect this channel to grow absurdly and make me a lot of money. But we have reached the number of subscribers a while ago, and this is just bookkeeping, and this is just being a good guy. But this was holding me back, and yesterday I got an email from YouTube saying that I finally reached this number. So thank you all for watching. It is amazing to me that almost 2,000 of you are out there watching almost 4,000 hours worth of my content. It is mind-blowing. And I will apply to the partnership program and whatnot. Oh, and thank you, Bo and John, for joining me here on the chat. And yeah, thanks. It is, of course, because of you all that I was able to reach this milestone. So I appreciate you being here. Let's get to business. So I said before that this stream was going to be about how to start up the Kill the Newsletter application. And I don't mean how to start the work on the Kill the Newsletter application, because we have started this a couple weeks ago. 1 week ago, I think. But what I mean is how the application is going to fire up. When you go and you run the command that starts the application, what will happen then? And we have been using Node.js. And in particular, we have been using Express, which is this web framework that is almost the de facto standard for Node.js applications. There are many other frameworks, but Express has been for 10 years and still is the most popular choice. And the thing that I love about Express is also the thing that is more work about Express. And that is that it's very lightweight, and it does not come with a lot of opinions. It does not prescribe how you should start your application, how you should manage your processes, how you should, any of that. It doesn't have any opinions. It doesn't tell you how to manage JavaScript, CSS, and images and fonts on the client side, on the browser. It comes with very little in terms of infrastructure. And that's by design, because it means that you can take Express and put it to work in whatever way you want it. If you have a big corporation with thousands of small apps that communicate, great. You can use Express for that if you want. If you have a niche project, a side project that is relatively small, you can also use Express for that. And it works pretty well in every place, I think. Anyway, that's my impression of it, and that's why I like it. The downside of this, of course, is that it gives you a lot of choice and you have to make lots of decisions. It's not omakase, to use a term from the Ruby on Rails community, that is much more opinionated. I guess in a way, since Bo and John are here on the chat and they watch my streams because of JS effects and Reaper stuff, or at least that's how they started to watch my streams, I would say that perhaps Node.js and Express are like Reaper in that sense. It gives you all the power, all the flexibility, but it does mean that the learning curve is a bit steeper. You have to make more decisions along the way. If you are willing to put in the investment, I think it pays off greatly because you end up with a tool that works exactly how you want it to work. But today is the day in which we are going to make decisions and do some bookkeeping and boilerplate. I find it very rewarding to do these kinds of things, but it's going to get into the system administration part of the spectrum. And let's take a moment to appreciate how the old application was doing this. This is the code for the old version of Kill the Newsletter that we are changing. So the old application defined a function that would return to you two servers, a web server and an email server. Because remember, Kill the Newsletter is this application that receives emails, newsletters, and turns them into RSS feeds or Atom feeds and serves that to you in a web application manner. So it needs the email server to receive the emails, and it needs the web application to serve the Atom feeds. So you would call this function and get these two applications back. And then you would check. If you are, and I guess there is a bit of flexibility in the old setup that we will no longer have in the new setup. The flexibility is you can call this function from anywhere you want. You could have a JavaScript module that imports Kill the Newsletter as a module. And then you can fire up the application in whatever way you see fit, which is a great deal of flexibility. You can even intercept requests as they're coming into the application and change the behavior of the application in that way. You can cut very deep into the architecture of Kill the Newsletter as it used to exist. And that's great. Means that you can customize things to work your way. If you want to deploy your own version of Kill the Newsletter, you have a lot of power when you do that. But again, there is a trade-off between flexibility and working out of the box and ergonomics. And since I developed this version of Kill the Newsletter, I changed my mind about some points of flexibility and extension in the applications that I developed, not just Kill the Newsletter. One major thing for me is that this flexibility of allowing you to tap into the web application and email application objects directly like this is great for customization, but I don't think that many people use this I don't think that anyone ever used this level of customization. And it means that I have to give away some power that would make things even more ergonomic and even more secure for the people who do deploy the application. So you can just go to so there are three ways, I guess, to use Kill the Newsletter. You can just go to the Kill the Newsletter version that I host, this is my server, I pay for this, and you can use it, it's free. Or if you want to have more control over everything, you want to have your own installation of this, you can download the source code and run it on your own server. That's the second way. The third way is to import Kill the Newsletter as part of a bigger Node.js application. And while I know that there are many people using Kill the Newsletter in the first and second ways, there are many people who go to killthenewsletter.com, there are many people who deploy their own version in their own servers, Maybe not as many people, of course, but there are people out there who do this. And then there are no folks that I know of, no one that I know of that does the third way, which is to take these objects and instantiate them as part of a bigger Node.js application. So I don't know anyone who's doing this, and it is a bit of a burden to maintain, and I have to give away some of the customization that I would do, some of the things that would make the application even more secure, even better, and I have to give that up because I'm not taking control over this. So I'm going to change this infrastructure, and I'm not going to allow you to just get a hold of these objects and do whatever you see fit. In fact, the application will not hold up by itself like it does right now. Because right now there is a single process that is firing up a web application, an email application that is serving static files like the icons and fonts and CSS and whatnot. All of that is done by a single process. And when I did this, I thought it was very cute that there was a single process that would manage everything. But in hindsight, it is not the best use of resources, because it means that if an email is coming in and there is a request on the web server at the same time, one will have to wait for the other, because Node.js is, for the most part, a single-threaded environment. There is no concurrency in terms of processing an email at the same time as processing a web request. These things happen interleaved, so you don't necessarily have to wait for the completion of one task before you start the other, as long as there is some process that is asynchronous, like writing to a file, for instance. So you don't have to wait for the whole process to end, but they cannot run in parallel. So there is a bit of a concurrency, but there is no parallelism, to use some big words. And that's not the best use of resources, because it means there is one CPU core who is doing all the work and the rest of the CPU cores are just sitting and waiting. Also, serving static files from a Node.js application, as I mentioned before, turned out to be a major performance problem in my measurements, in my experience. So I'm going to move away from that, which means that the reverse proxy that sits in front of the application, that will sit in front of the application now, will serve the static files, will also manage the TLS termination, which happens to be the reason why we started this whole endeavor, as I mentioned in a couple of streams back. So yeah, I am now enforcing some architectural decisions on people who will deploy this. They will have less points of extension with the benefit of having more ergonomics and security and all of that, which I think is a fair trade-off. We'll see. People who actually deploy this on their own servers will tell me if they like this or not. But anyway, so here's, by the way, the code that fires up the application right now. I check if this file is being imported from another Node.js module, or if it is being run from the command line directly. And if the latter, which tends to be the most common scenario, we will take the web application and email application, which is just returned from this, and then we start both applications. Very cute. And also, if you provide me a configuration file, we will read that configuration file using a very smart way of configuring things. Typically, configuration files tend to be plain text, like a .ini file or some JSON or YAML. But for Kill the Newsletter, the configuration file is JavaScript, which I require as a module. That means you can use any program to generate your configuration, which is super powerful. Again, I made this with extensibility in mind. I thought about every way you could want to extend this, which perhaps was a bit too much. So we're going to dial back some of this. Now, I think that maybe the best way to go about this is to look at the code that I wrote to fire up Courselor, which is my other web application that is also open source, and that happens to be my day job. So this is the code that fires up the application. Now, mind you that Courselor is much more complex. It's a much bigger application than Kill the Newsletter. So just the file that fires up the application is almost 500 lines of code, which happens to be, I think, about the same size or bigger than Kill the Newsletter. It's slightly smaller, but not by a whole lot. It is very large. And some of this, or most of this, will make its way into Kill the Newsletter. Now let's get to it, I guess. This is the new index MTS for Kill the Newsletter. And here we have the setup for testing, which we did last time. I'm going to keep this, and I'm going to start bringing stuff from there. And I will explain what's going on and adapt as I go. So first point of extensibility that I will cut is, as I mentioned, the fact that you can import the application as a module. In fact, that reminds me, in package.json for Kill the Newsletter, I want to make sure that there is no exports. Yes, there is no exports. So if you were to npm install this module, you would not be able to import anything. Or maybe you would be able to import everything because I haven't defined an exports field. Well, whatever. You're not supposed to do that. And then I will have this line, which is a new way to detect whether this file has been imported from a different Node.js program or if it has been called from the command line directly. But now that I think of it, in the context of Courselor, it makes sense to have this check because the index file will be imported in other files, but in Kill the Newsletter, I think we'll have everything in a single file, so we don't even need that line, which is kind of nice. It simplifies things a bit. The thing is that Courselor is so large that I had to split it up in multiple files. Not for any essential reason, just for the reason that I didn't want to scare people with one file with 40, 50,000 lines of code. So I broke it apart in multiple files, but Kill the Newsletter is so small that I will keep it in a single file. But I do want to comment on this line because it has changed, and that's part of the transition from the old module system into the new module system. So in Node.js, as I mentioned a couple times already, there used to be this common JS way of doing JavaScript modules, and now we are using ECMAScript modules. So back in the day, you used to do this to say, am I imported from another module or am I running directly from the command line, which is very straightforward. It's almost meant to be easy to do. And in ECMAScript modules, it's not so easy. The best way I found of doing this is this, which is kind of long-handed, but it is checking if myself is equal to the first argument that was passed on the command line. And I have to resolve symbolic links and whatnot. So I find this kind of convoluted, but it is the best translation I could have for this line. And I mentioned this because when I Googled for this problem, I was migrating some common JS modules into ECMAScript modules. I couldn't find a satisfactory answer. I found some Stack Overflow answers. I found some NPM packages that were supposed to fix this or that was supposed to address this. But nothing really worked. And I had to come up with this line by myself, which is just one simple line, but it was a bit of a headache to get there. And Mage is here. Hello. Just got in from a coffee and rum afternoon with some neighbors. Good. Right. So the next line here is something that I do want to keep. I'm thinking about something. Maybe the test will require us to do things a bit differently. Yeah, I'm thinking ahead here. When we get to run automated tests, I will want to fire up the web application and the email application, but I think that perhaps the best way of doing that is to go through the command line. Right, that's what we'll do, so it's okay. And anytime I import a line of code or I copy and paste a line of code, I should also refer to the imports up top. I will keep them here. So this line is relatively straightforward. It is looking at the version that is declared in package.json. And that version will be available in the application as a plain variable. And it will also be available on the command line when you call the program from the command line. And I think that's it. I don't think it will be available from anywhere else. Next comes some code to do command line argument parsing. When we eventually get this whole thing built, we will call the application with something like this, and we will pass as arguments some stuff. That sort of thing. And this configuration, this command line arguments are going to be so simple. These command lines, God damn it, these command line arguments are going to be so simple that perhaps we didn't need really a library to read them. But I'm going to use one because it gives me good error messages in case you pass the arguments the wrong way. And it is, again, one of those very popular libraries. It's like Express. So you might as well just use it. And you know what? I think at this point I might just copy the whole thing. Yeah, I think I would just copy the whole thing, and I will copy all the imports and everything up to there. And this is now a lot. But yeah, whatever. We'll go from there. And I'm missing some libraries. And I think that they don't have types built in. Yeah. I am npm installing for development, the types for Lodash, and the types for ddeng. And now the errors go away. Excellent. Oh, I already know a problem that will happen because it was super nice. I was doing another library that I have that we will actually use called Cache. We will use this library to package the application in the end. But I was writing the tests for Cache itself. And it goes along the same lines as what we are writing here. I test if there is a environment variable saying that I should be running the tests for that, which is in this case Cache. And then I do a bunch of things to test the application. Now what's cute is that Cache will call itself on the command line to package stuff. But then the environment variable would be set. And because the environment variable was set, it actually got, when I tried to run the tests, it got back into this loop or into this conditional, which called itself on the command line and which called itself on the command line. So I had a recursion. And typically when these things happen, your system just runs out of resources and complains about something like you cannot have so many processes, or you cannot have so many files, or you cannot have a call stack that is that deep, something like that. There are usually protections in place for this, because effectively what I did was a fork bomb without realizing it, but I was doing a fork bomb. But in that case, for whatever reason, I don't know exactly why, it didn't catch that. So I tried to run the tests, and it's very rare that this happens, but that time my computer froze and I got some visual glitches in macOS, like the screen turned pink and my computer restarted. It's very rare that I mess up something so bad that my computer restarts, but it happened that time when I was testing Cache. So I have to perhaps just refer to how I did it in Cache. And fix that before I get into any trouble. So I don't want, when I'm running this in test mode, I don't want to proceed executing stuff below. And this is the crucial line. This is the line that is going to delete the environment variable so that when we call ourselves on the command line, we don't get in here anymore. All right, let's see what you have to say. I spent a couple of hours looking at libraries Zod and TS toolbelt. It seems like, Mage, you have the same hobby I have, which is to find libraries of things I think would be nice to do someday and just read the docs and file them. So at some point, if I need them, I will know what to use. For instance, after the stream with Aria last Friday, I found this, I think it was WaveFile. I found this package called WaveFile, I think. Yes, that. And it allows you to read and write wave files. And it allows you to manipulate samples too. It even implements the A-law and mu-law that we looked at on Friday. So I thought perhaps I could use this package to do some digital signal processing in JavaScript, which may be more accessible, so I could reach a wider audience and talk about filters, distortion, audio in general, but using JavaScript. Of course, this would not be real-time audio processing. You would have to record something and pass through your program, but it could be a nice way to introduce this to people who don't know about it. Let's see. What are you into, Mage? Schema declaration and validation library, as in you have, for instance, a configuration file and you define a schema for a configuration file, and then you can verify that a given configuration file is following that schema. Perhaps something like that. Nice. I think that these kinds of tools are valuable. I don't think you asked me about this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that these kinds of tools in general, like validating schemas and defining stuff, is useful when you have multiple people or multiple teams working on something and they need to have a contract to communicate and to collaborate and to cooperate. So when you have applications that may speak different languages unless you make absolutely sure that they are in sync, that's when I find these kinds of things useful. But I'm saying this because at some point in my past, I was super into these sorts of things. I was studying programming language theory, type systems. I was getting deep into verification, validation, and correctness, asserting correctness, provable correctness of programs. And I think that that's a rabbit hole that is very interesting, but maybe overused. I think that this is useful if you're doing medical applications, if you're doing something that is going to run a big business, something that is going to fly an airplane. Then these methods are important. I tend to work on smaller projects. My day job is a small, not tiny, but relatively small web application. My side projects tend to be relatively small, like Kill the newsletter. So I find that if I was to use these kinds of tools, I would be abusing them. I don't think that that's exactly what they are for. A lightweight type system like TypeScript for me, seems to be just the right dose of provable correctness, because it's not even a sound type system. It's just the right smidge of verification that I want the computer to do, and I get a good collaboration between human and machine. Anything beyond that, I find a bit too much for my own use. Now let's look at this. Oh, wow. Hang on. Now, I get what this is going to do. It's going to give me utility types, which is very useful. TypeScript comes with some utility types. Comes with these utility types, and I often reach to them. They're very useful. But something like this, for instance, I don't think I get it. Not at first glance anyway. Because what's the difference between this and the ampersand operator to merge the two types? What's the difference between this and the... Oh no, I think that this one is not in here. There is the omit type, which removes some field from the object, but it does not make it optional. And then there is the partial, which makes every field optional. But there is nothing like this. So this, I don't think I get it, but this I get it. And I think it's useful. I think it's nice. And oh my God. Okay. I think it's like the Lodash of types. Fun. Good to know. I didn't know about this. I will keep it in my back pocket. If at some point I find that the utility types are not, the TypeScript utility types are not doing it for me, or if I am having to write some incantation that perhaps is too complicated, I will look into this and see if they have something for me. Thanks for bringing it up. So it looks useful to detect changes in the Obsidian API for plugins. Oh, yeah, fair. So I guess it is sort of related to the point I was making, where Obsidian is a big system because there are plugins. So there are different people working on these different parts, and they have to collaborate somehow. And then it is useful to have something that asserts that the interface is correct. Oh, nice. You're looking at Kasha right now. Yeah, we will be using it soon. And I have some streams in which I covered some parts of it. I have worked on Kasha in my streams in the past, but we will be using it soon. I don't think today, but we'll be using it soon. Or maybe even today, we'll see. Right, so this is the tiniest bit of setup for testing that, you know, at this point, I might as well just grab all the tests from the old application and then boop, put them here. There are not so many tests anyway. And then by doing this, I am ready to eliminate one of the files in the to-do folder. Awesome. So these are the tests. I can fold them for now because I don't want to look at them. Then let's go over the rest of this. Force anything that says course.lore needs to be updated. And I forget what the tagline is for Kill the Newsletter. It is this. So again, commander is this, oops. I pressed the wrong keyboard shortcut. Commander is this library that will help you parse the command line arguments. That sort of thing. And I have some options that I don't want to show in the documentation because they are internal. They are options that we'll be using in a moment. You'll see that we'll be calling ourselves over and over. And these options are going to be hidden from people who use Kill the Newsletter. It will be mainly for us. So that's why I have this to hide from the help, from the commander help. And that seems all right. This version is coming from here. I think that we will have some documentation like that, so I will keep this, but I will remove the web from the path. Course.lore is an application that is actually a collection of small applications. It is a web application, which is relatively big, and we are working on a mobile application, a desktop application. That's why it has an extra folder in there. Okay, so this is the function that gets called when we have parsed the command line arguments. And we will go over all this. But I'm trying to now catch why Prettier is complaining. I have a syntax problem somewhere, and I want to fix it. Is this the problem? Yeah, that was the problem. And I guess I will commit this, even though it's entirely broken, just to have a checkpoint. Okay, and we will look at stuff that is above this, and we will look at stuff that is below this. But right here is where we define the application itself, where we write the code for Kill the Newsletter to work. So I guess I will copy this, same way I did with the tests. I will copy and paste this here as a placeholder. And that allows me to delete the whole to-do folder. Isn't that good? Isn't that good? Ben is here. Hey, what's up? What have you been up to? I think that you were here mostly for the JS effects stuff. We are doing JavaScript today. We will be back to JS effects tomorrow. Right, yeah, tomorrow. But if you're into JavaScript and web programming, come along. Okay, so I'm going to say this again. In Node.js and in Express, there is a lot of flexibility. You also have to make lots of decisions and write stuff from scratch. And that's what we are doing here. We are defining how the application is going to fire up. And before, there was a single process to manage all the web server, email server, serving static files and whatnot. TLS, termination, all was done by a single process. We are going to change that and use multiple processes. And there are different ways of doing this. We are going to have one process that will be managing everything else. That will be the main process that is responsible for restarting a child process in case it dies and that sort of thing. We will have a different process type that I think I will call web. maybe HTTP. What did we used to call this? Web application. I think I will call it web. And then we will have another that we'll call email, which will be the email server. So there will be 3 types of processes now. Instead of everything running from a single process, there will be 3 types of processes. The main process will have a single instance of that. It is responsible for managing the rest of the processes. Then we have a web process that only runs the web part of the application. A request comes in, it is served by that process. And then we will have the email process, which receives email. We will also have a reverse proxy kind of process, but I don't have to be specific about that here because we will be using Caddy for that. And then not only we will have different kinds of processes to better distribute the work among the CPU cores, we will also have multiple instances of these 2 kinds of processes. We will have a single main process managing everything. We will have a single reverse proxy, Caddy, but we will have multiple web processes and multiple email processes. Again, the intent being to better use the resources from the machine. But because we will have multiple instances of this, we will need the process number. And it may be weird that the process number is a string, but that's how it comes on the command line. It is a string on the command line. That's why it's a string here. Then I have this very clever piece of code. It took me ages to write this. It's one of those things. It took me ages to write this because there are so many corner cases that I had to learn about. Perhaps something like Ruby on Rails would not give me this kind of headache. But then I wouldn't have as much control over everything as I have in this case. So let's go over what this is. It's a promise that is going to do 2 things. Number 1, it will listen for signals. So when you hit Control-C on the command line, or when your process manager wants to terminate your process, or on Windows when you hit, Control pause break or something, I forget. But there is a combination of keys that you can type to stop a process on Windows. In all those cases, it's going to be listening for those signals. It will also listen for the Node.js process trying to terminate, and that usually happens because an exception was thrown and wasn't caught. So an unhandled exception will also trigger this. So it will listen for all these types of signals, all the things that would indicate that it is time for us to shut down. Listens for all those kinds of signals. That's the first thing this piece of code does. The second thing that this piece of code does is make sure that the Node.js process will stay alive. And that's kind of a feature, a quirk of Node.js. It has this event loop. So when you receive an HTTP request, or when you receive an email, or when you ask to read a file and the file has been read by the kernel and the contents are available to you, in all those cases, an event occurs and Node.js has a loop listening for those events. It will treat that event, or it will hand that event to you. But the thing is, you may have more program to run, more code to run, and there may be nothing holding the event loop alive, keeping the event loop active. So there may be more code that you want to run, but the event loop is no longer active, so your process terminates. Isn't that weird? You still have some more code to run, but Node.js doesn't know that you want to run that kind of code, so it terminates early. That happens if there is nothing holding the event loop. And things that may hold the event loop active are timers. So when you use set timeout, set interval, that sort of thing. I/O. So if you have a server open, or if you're reading a file or that sort of thing, will keep the event loop open. and there may be others, but I forget. The main are timers and I/O. But if you are doing some code that is asynchronous for whatever reason, and it is not doing I/O or keeping the server alive or that sort of thing, keeping a server active, that sort of thing, your process may die. So what I do here in this piece of code is I create a timer that is artificial. It doesn't do anything. You can see that the code for the timer is empty. It's not being awaited on. And I never get this value that would be returned by the timer. I don't use it for anything. But it is a set interval. So this is guaranteed to keep the event loop alive. I also pass an abort controller to that timer. So at some point I will abort this and the process will be cleared from this timer. Anything else that could hold the process alive will still exist. So if there are other timers, if there is a web server or whatnot, those will still keep the event loop alive. So this is just in case there is no computation going, this will keep the process alive. And this is crucial because some parts of the code below will, for instance, manage children processes. And if all the children die at the same time, that's a tragedy. But if all the children die at the same time, then the parent would be free to terminate. The main process would be free to terminate, and that's not what we want. We want the main process to respawn new children. But there would be no child process hanging the event loop alive. So this timer will do that for us. And I will do this even in the other kinds of processes that have web servers, email servers open, and that sort of thing. Oh, it seems like we have some bookkeeping to do. My private photo here free. I don't want to hide. I want to report. Does it matter that I'm reporting this? Do you think that YouTube will do anything about this account? I don't know. I always report these things. Yeah, it's just 10 or 15 lines, but I had to learn more about signals. I had to learn more about the event loop and all that. But the effect of this code is that it ends up being a promise that only resolves after one of these signals has been sent. So it only resolves when we are ready to stop the application, when it's time to shut down. It guarantees that it will keep the event loop alive, but it will not hold the event loop open for no good reason, because it will abort as soon as an event is received. So I'm very, very proud of this thing. I don't know if anything like this exists as a library anywhere. Maybe this could be a small, tiny utility in some library or a library by itself, because it's kind of useful, very niche, difficult to write, or at least it was for me. Right, here, let's rename, cue the name, cue the newsletter. Let's rename this, and this is going to be an application variable. I may not need this actually. Yeah. I think I'm going to promote all of this to variables. Well, process is not going to be a good variable name, is it? Yeah, in that case, I think I'm going to keep application as a variable. The thing is, of course, we are translating this or adapting this from CourseLore. And in CourseLore, it makes sense to have this application variable because that's what's passed everywhere to the other files, but in kill the newsletter, we have a single file. So having this variable is sort of redundant, but I think it's nice to have it here. So I will have it here. Then the process here is given a random ID. It's given a process type, which is one of the three we talked about. And a process number, which will help us determine the right port to listen on. If you know Node.js, you may know about the cluster module, which is meant to do the thing we are doing, spawn multiple children processes with the same code and share network ports. I could have used cluster from Node.js. I decided to not use it. I decided to use the load balancer in Caddy because it gives me more flexibility in terms of the policy for allocating the load. It gives me health checks, and it gives me a lot more options than just the cluster module. So yeah, that's why the process number is necessary here. We'll get to that in a moment. We'll see how that number is translated into a port later. Then this is the new version of the line that I showed you before. I think it's still here somewhere. Yeah, so I showed you this line. So I guess it's kind of hard to read. So I showed you this line before where we require a configuration file written in JavaScript. We are still doing the same in the new version of the application, but this time we have to use the new syntax for importing instead of require. We are using the so-called dynamic import. And then the static files are generated from ESBuild using the script we looked at last time. And it will be under the build folder static. There will be a paths.json file that maps from file names to the digested file names in the bundle. We sort of saw this last time. Then the ports, yeah, so this is where we translate from process numbers into ports, and we will have to reserve the ports starting at 6,000, 7,000, and 8,000. Well, not in this case, I don't think, because we only have two kinds of processes, and I don't think that they will need to communicate in any way. Yeah, they will not need to communicate in any way. So we can simplify this. In Kill the Newsletter, it's slightly more complicated. But let's look at the types of processes that we have. Web and email. I guess we'll have web. Oh, I just realized something. When we have multiple web servers running, we can distribute the load using a load balancer like Caddy. But an email server is not so easy to load balance. We would need to have an SMTP load balancer, and Caddy is not such a thing, and that may be overkill to have such a thing. So maybe the email server will be a single process. The web server can be clustered, but the email process will not be clustered. Oh well. So we will have only web, like so. And I thought about having a different kind of process as well to do background jobs, because there is one case where I think we would need a background job, and that's when we receive an email, we need to check that the inbox, the given newsletter, has not exceeded a certain size. And if it exceeded that size, we need to truncate it. So that could be done in the background process, or it could be done in the email process itself. I think we'll do it in the email process. Yeah, we are already over-engineering this, so I think that will be enough. And we will have the different kinds of processes here. So the web process and the email process. And this will be undefined for, or I guess it will be to do for now. Then this whole notion of demonstration can go away. There is a special way of running CoreSlower where it is in demonstration mode to create demonstration data and whatnot. We don't have that kind of thing in Kill the Newsletter. I will allow you to run this on a tunnel that's using something like local tunnel. If you know that kind of project, you can run a server on your machine and have someone else on the internet see that server. I will keep this configuration for that. That I will keep, and that I will keep, and that I will keep. We'll see how that's used further below. And then at this point, we have the actual application. So I'm going to take oh, interesting. There you go. The types were wrong because I had an as any there. Okay, that's better. So now let's have a request, response, and response send to do. Just a placeholder to have some root on the application for us to be able to do some requests. And this is where we are going to define the code for Kill the Newsletter itself. Let's skip all that. Just have the placeholder for now. Skip all the application itself, because today we're dealing only with the startup of the application. Now let's get to here. Then I will check what kind of process I am. You can imagine that I'm going to fork myself and change the parameters many times. Then we have the child processes. This is the main process. It will have a bunch of child processes and it will restart them, making sure that they are alive. If they die, we spawn a new child. And then for the web type, we will want to have these many processes. For the email type, we will want to have one. And then I will need to call object dot entries. And that. So now instead of having just a list, I have an object of process types and how many of them I want. Then the process type should be a string, and it is, and this should be a number. And it is. Great. Then I will loop over this amount or process quantity count. I will go with count. Process count. I loop over that. This gives me a process number, and then I am going to define some parameters that will be used to call exec_a, which is a library to call programs on the command line. This library. But these are just the arguments. I'm not really making the call here. You will see why in a moment. So I pass the process type, the process number, the configuration. That was a configuration file given on the command line. It was one of the command line arguments. Here. And in terms of options for exec_a, I have this, which will allow us to call, for instance, Caddy, which is installed in the Node modules folder. I will inherit IO. The IO of the child will be the IO of the parent in such a way that we are creating new processes, but they are all going to read from the standard input and write to the standard output like that. And then if the environment of the application is production, we set the node env environment variable, which is necessary for Node to, or for Node packages like Express to turn on the production mode, which is optimized and more secure in some contexts. And besides just the children that are processes of our own application, we also have Caddy, which is the reverse proxy. And again, there will be some setup here, passing command lines to Caddy. In this case, I'm ignoring the standard input and output because, or the standard output and error, actually. I'm ignoring the outputs of Caddy because it tends to be super noisy when it starts logging stuff. I don't find it very useful to have it, so I just ignore that log. Then here is the Caddy setup, which again is just a couple lines, but it took me so long to configure all this. I give you I give the administrator email to the certificate authority, which is issuing the TLS certificate. If I'm running locally, I use local certificates. Then I have all these headers, which make the application in some contexts more secure. It is also dealing with some cosmetic stuff. And all of this is in this common snippet that will be imported in other places in Caddy's configuration. Then I have some other routes that redirect. So for instance, www.killthenewsletter redirects to bare, just kill the newsletter without www. So I have these sorts of redirects here. And why is alternative host names not cool? I think that we may be missing a type declaration. Here, because this comes out as any. I think I would like to declare this type. Let's go to CourseLore and grab the type from there. And I don't want this configuration because I'm not sending email. I don't need that because Kill the Newsletter doesn't have a demonstration mode. And that's it. That should have fixed the error below. And I guess it did because it was around here. It was here. And now host name is a string. Or a list of strings. Interesting. I don't think that this type is correct. What's the type of this? It's a list of string. That's correct. Oh. I think I needed this. Yep, that's the correct type. Hey, I found a bug in CourseLore. Good stuff. Then here's some more Caddy configuration to do redirection. Here we have the main configuration for our application. Great, let's dive into this. It is gonna try and serve the file from the static folder, and if it can, it will set a cache that is huge because of the whole cache busting that we talked about last time in our last session. But this is something that is for course lore. We don't need that. Okay, so you probably didn't notice this because it is a lot of code, but this whole thing that was defining the arguments to use to exec A to create this was in a for loop. And then finally we see the body of the for loop. And what it does is it starts an asynchronous process. Here, it starts an asynchronous process that will keep a while loop. While you have to restart the children, you create a child process using exec A and the arguments given in the loop above, in these objects we had above. It stores the child process in a set and it awaits on that child process. So if the child process dies or terminates correctly or incorrectly, it doesn't really matter. What it will do is it will log what came out of the application and it will run the while loop again. So it will keep the child alive. I guess I will need this application.log. I think I will define it later. So I'll keep this line wrong. Keep this error for now. So this whole while loop, or I guess this whole for loop, will be responsible for keeping all the children alive. I think that that's a very smart way of writing this. Then we await on that promise I showed you above that listens for the signals. And whatever is after this will be what we need to do to shut down. So we need to say that we no longer want the main process to restart children. That's the condition of the loop. Then we cancel all the children, and that's that. And we get here where we have this. This is a safety measure. In case some child refuses to die, cancel from exec A will send a sig kill. So it will kill the process without giving the process a chance of recovering. But even if that fails, in 10 seconds, we kill ourselves. The main process or the children, whatever, they will kill themselves after 10 seconds. And it's crucial that you have a ref false here because we don't want this to keep the event loop alive. So coming back to the problem of a timer may keep the event loop alive, we don't want that here. We want this timer to run after 10 seconds and kill ourselves with an error. 1 is a error code when exiting a process. 0 is success. Anything that is not 0 is failure. So 1 is failure. And here, we don't want this timer to keep the event loop alive. In case all the children terminate correctly, we want the main process to terminate as well, and this timer will be ignored and we never run this code. So I guess this ties back to the conversation I had about keeping the event loop active. Then we will have an email type and a web type. And in this case, I'm calling this web. But I don't have that. The code shifts to the left because we no longer have more than 1,000 lines of code. Oh, I guess I'm missing this. I remember fixing this type problem before, and I don't remember how I did it. Oh, yeah. That's how I did it. It's kind of a hack, but it will do the job. We are saying that undefined is a number. The type system will not help us with that, but we'll be fine. Famous last words. Anyway, it gets rid of the type errors below, so that's good. So all we do here is get a hold of the web application. We emit this custom event called start, which may not be necessary in this application, but I think it's good form to let the application know that it is about to start. Then we create a server from this web application. We wait on that same promise that listens for signals. And then when we are ready to shut down, we close the server, we emit the stop event to the internal web application. And that's that. And on the email server, we will have to do some work, but for now, it is just a to-do. Because, or I guess I will await on stop at least, so that the application behaves correctly, but it doesn't do anything for now. But it will fire up a process. It's just not gonna do anything. Okay, that was a lot of coding and no testing. Let's npm install just in case and try and run this. Oh, npm install failed? Oh, because that application log that I kept there. Let's define application log real quick. And it will have a bunch of parameters with type of any, and for now, I guess I will just merge with a space. I will do that here for now. Because I want the types to work out. Can hit compile now? Yeah, it compiled. Awesome. Oh, exactly. That's exactly the line I want, actually. And let's see if the processes fire up. I couldn't find the configuration file, which is fair. Let's create a configuration file real quick by copying the whole configuration folder from course lore. Oops, that's not gonna work out. What do we have here? Nothing. Okay, it is gonna work out. This is probably gonna be queue the newsletter in the future, or queuethenewsletter.com. This will not exist. This is an example. We'll get to it. We'll get to this too. It's a systemd configuration file, but it is in the configuration folder, so I thought I would just go ahead and adapt it. It's not that hard. Let's look at the development MJS file and see what we need to adapt in here. Yep, that seems good. Let's try again. This is taking longer than I wanted it to take. Oh, I guess it's just because it's not logging anything. Yep, here is to do. So it's not logging anything for now. We will add logging in the next session, but it is firing processes. All right, let's look at the activity monitor and I will show you all the processes and how they are being managed and everything. So here is the main Node.js process, then the reverse proxy, and then 8 web servers and 1 email server. Perhaps for the email server, I could use the cluster from Node.js because it is able to share ports. That would work. No, I don't want to go there. I'll just leave that as it is. So yeah, that's how you do a reverse proxy, clustering, keeping processes alive, something like Forever does something like this. We are not using Forever. We are sort of rolling out our own. And I also want to show you what happens when I take one of these children and arbitrarily kill it. See, the parent noticed that the child was lost and respawned a new one. The process ID is different. And I can still load the page just the same. So yeah, pretty tricky stuff. That was kind of a lot of code to go over. But yeah, we are getting in good shape here. Let's adapt the default one real quick because it's also very easy. The different configuration files serve different purposes, and I will get into that probably in 2 sessions from now or something. Yeah, we can stop here actually. Let me just go to the chat real quick and see what you all have to say. Okay, Spirobell is here. Hello. Nice to have you here. Did you look at TRPC as well? Okay. No, to answer you, no, I have not. I don't know what this is about. So probably RPCs for remote procedure call. Oh, and Zod has been used here. Second time we see it today. And this will allow you to do remote procedure calls. So it will allow you to send messages between the children processes. That's nice. I will look into this. Thanks for the mention. The value that Zod provides only becomes clear in the context of TRs. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. But it makes sense. I think that it really boils down to you have multiple people in different teams trying to collaborate, and then you need something to enforce the collaboration. Also, TypeScript type checking is compiled away in runtime. So yes, something called type erasure, if you want to be fancy about it. So for example, while consuming an untrusted REST API, something like Zod is necessary. Oh, because Zod is going to run at runtime. It's going to verify at runtime and not just at compile time, I suppose. And TypeScript definitions fall out of it, which is nice for VS Code IntelliSense for help. Oh, nice. Interesting. I always like when the projects give this sort of ergonomics and usability consideration. Anyway, oh yeah, sure, absolutely. So another happy user of Cache, or another user at least, and use it to build a Monero wallet RPC. What is Monero wallet? You know so many things that I don't. Okay, it's a cryptocurrency. Wouldn't have been possible without it. Awesome. more like merging these roles in one person and one code base. Okay. Maybe check out Theo's video and the T3 stack. I think you will like it. T3 stack. What's that? Quickest way to start a new web application. What's this about? Interactive CLI to create a setup of opinionated full stack types safe Next.js project. Okay. And it uses TRPC. I do like some of these tools, but I tend not to use them. I like TypeScript, as you know at this point, and I like Tailwind for the design system, but I created my own thing on top of it. I don't use Tailwind. I don't really like the way that class names double as sort of attributes. It's kind of weird to me. So I do it in another way, but I do lift the design system from Tailwind. I even ported it to JS Effects. More about this in my JS Effects streams. Next.js, I don't particularly use it. I tend to go with Express. And Prisma, I also don't use it. I think it's for database, am I right? Yeah. Object relational mapping. So it is a database thing. I looked into it. I decided that it was not for me. I tend to just write raw SQL in my code. We are going to see that in a future session, maybe on the next one. And I even created my own little library on top of Better SQLite 3. I use SQLite 3 for my database, so yeah. And I tend to do authentication by hand as well. So I guess I'm more a low-level person. Oh, awesome. You are a happy user of Kasha. Awesome. Kasha will receive some more love soon because there are a couple pull requests pending. Oh, nice. I will check these people because I'm not sure I know them. All right. So I think that's it for today. The schedule is that tomorrow I will be working on JS Effects. We'll be back to the AutoMixer. On Wednesday, we have a meeting of the C++ Digital Signal Processing Juice study group. For the time being, thank you to Mage, Spiralbell, Ben, and Bo, and John for joining me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all again for more coding soon. Take care of yourselves. Have a good one. Thanks for stopping by. See you. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.